Welcome to TobattoVision's Creepypasta compilation. 1 hour of original scary stories written by Brandon Tobatto. Be sure to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Enjoy the show. The Window Man. In the sleepy town of Eldritch Falls, an unsettling legend murmurs through the streets every summer as the thunderstorms begin to roll in from the east. They speak of the Window Man, a ghastly entity bound to the darkest, stormiest nights between June and August, manifesting only in the deepest hours between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Eldritch Falls had learned, through whispers and warnings, to fear these months, when the night sky crackles with electricity and the air grows thick enough to choke on. The story of the Window Man began decades ago with old Mr. Wilkins, a loner who lived on the outskirts of town, right where the woods began to swallow up the land. One stormy night, a neighbor's child, curious and fearless, peeked out his window to watch the lightning dance across the sky. Instead, his eyes met a different kind of spectacle. A figure, tall and slender, its body grotesquely humanoid but with skin as black as the storm overhead. Its face, a blank slate, held two eyes that shimmered like the storm itself, cold and lightning blue. That child was found the next morning, wide-eyed with terror, unable to speak a word of what he'd seen. His hair turned shock white. As the legend grew, so did the details. They said the Window Man didn't just watch, he waited for someone to lock eyes with him. Once you saw him, the storm outside would grow wilder, as if feeding off your fear. And with each lightning strike, he would inch closer to your window, his intentions as murky as the shadowed corner of a rain-soaked night. No one knew what happened if he reached the window. Those who were suspected to have seen him were invariably found in states of madness, or worse, their minds lost to a night of terror they could never recount. It was as if merely glimpsing the Window Man tethered you to a fate that was too grim for words. Time passed, and the tale wove its way into the fabric of Eldritch Falls like the creeping ivy on Mr. Wilkins' old, abandoned house. Parents used the story to frighten children into obedience, and teenagers dared each other to look out their windows during those ominous hours of the storm. But for Lena, a bright-eyed 17-year-old with a skeptic's heart, the Window Man was just a silly superstition, a relic of the town's superstitious past. One particularly stormy night in late July, Lena decided to debunk the myth once and for all. As the town slept and the clock crept toward 2 a.m., she sat by her window, camera in hand, determined to capture proof that the Window Man was nothing more than a story. Thunder boomed, a symphony to accompany the rapid flashes of lightning that illuminated the sky. 2 a.m. passed, then 3 a.m., and just as she began to yawn, resigned to the disappointment of myth, a chill ran down her spine. Outside, in the fleeting light of a lightning strike, stood the silhouette of the Window Man, just as the stories described. His eyes, a stark, piercing blue, locked onto hers. The wind howled louder as if in fury, and the trees bent as though bowing to a sinister king. The room temperature plummeted, and Lena's camera shook in her trembling hands. As she snapped a picture, the flash of the camera met the flash of the lightning, and the world outside her window turned blindingly white. When her vision cleared, the Window Man was gone. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. In the eerie silence that followed, a slow, deliberate tapping began against the glass. Tap, 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 a sound like the ticking of a clock, counting down the moments of sanity she had left. The next morning, Lena was nowhere to be found. Her room was pristine, untouched, except for the camera lying on the floor, its last picture taken showing nothing but an overexposed whiteness where the window should be. Her family searched, the town grieved, and the legend of the Window Man grew ever darker. To this day, when the storms of summer brew and the clock winds toward those haunted hours, the people of Eldritch Falls shutter their windows tight and pray that the tapping of rain against the glass is just that, nothing more than rain. For in the darkness of the storm, it's never just the wind, or a branch, or the benign shadows of night. Sometimes, it's the Window Man, waiting for his next pair of eyes to meet his in a silent, deadly dare. Mr. Fox. In the sleepy rural landscape of Willow's End, where the houses were scattered like lost coins and the woods hugged the borders of each property, there spread a chilling legend that kept the town's children locked up tight when night fell. They whispered of Mr. Fox, a figure both beguiling and horrific, dressed in a tattered tuxedo that had seen better days. His appearance was not just of a man, but a grotesque, humanoid fox, with sharp, elongated features, and eyes like burning coals that glinted with malice. Mr. Fox was known for his nocturnal prowls, moving with an eerie grace through the shadows of the night. His method was insidious, a tapping on the windows of children's bedrooms. Those who peeked through the curtains might see him performing a playful, almost comical dance in the moonlight. His movements were hypnotic, swirling his ragged tails as he beckoned the children to come outside and play. With the promise of toys and sweets, his voice was as silky as the shadows and as sweet as poisoned honey. "Come out, little ones," he'd whisper through cracks and under doorways. "Come play with Mr. Fox. I have candies and toys just for you." One such night, young Eli, whose curiosity often got the better of his judgment, heard the tapping on his window. Peering out, he saw the strange festive figure of Mr. Fox dancing under the pale glow of the street lamp. Eli quietly crept out of his house, leaving the safety of his bed and the watchful eyes of his sleeping parents. As he joined Mr. Fox in the street, the creature's dance grew more frantic, more jubilant. Eli laughed, delighted, unaware of the danger, as they danced their way to the dark edge of the woods. It was only when they reached the threshold where the trees grew thick and the moonlight dared not penetrate that Eli felt the first grip of fear. Mr. Fox's eyes gleamed brighter, and his teeth, sharp and pointed, were bared in a grin not of friendship but of hunger. Eli turned to run, but the forest behind him seemed to close in, the path home obscured by an impenetrable darkness that seemed to swallow all light and sound. He turned back to Mr. Fox, who now stood tall, his playful demeanor shed like an unwanted skin, revealing the predator beneath. The last sounds Eli heard were the rustle of leaves and a low, growling chuckle as Mr. Fox advanced. Back home, his window remained open, a silent testament to the child who had vanished into the night. The next morning, the town was in an uproar. Search parties were formed and the woods were combed, but of Eli, there was no sign except for a small, tattered piece of his pajama shirt found snagged on the branch of a gnarled tree. His parents were inconsolable, his mother's cries a constant echo through the town. As the years passed, more children disappeared. With each vanishing, the legend of Mr. Fox grew, feeding on the fear and sorrow of the town. Parents double-locked doors and windows, keeping their children close as dusk fell. Yet, despite their efforts, the tapping continued. The promise of toys and candies whispered through the cracks, and every few years, another child would disappear into the night, lured away by the dancing figure of Mr. Fox. Each morning after, as the town awoke to the absence of yet another child, only the echo of distant, eerie laughter seemed to hang in the air, a cruel reminder of the price of curiosity and the deadly allure of a dance in the moonlight. The malevolence of Mrs. Whitaker. I used to think ghost stories were just that, stories. But then I moved into the old Whitaker place and everything I believed flipped inside out, darkness seeping into my reality like ink on paper. Mrs. Whitaker, the house's former mistress, died here 45 years before I ever set foot inside, her death shrouded in whispers of solitude and madness. If only I'd heeded those whispers. From my first night, the house felt alive with a malignant presence. Doors would slam shut, shattering the silence of the night. My dishes would often hurtle through the air as if hurled by unseen hands, smashing against the wall with force enough to startle even the dead. But it was the stairs where she first made her violent intentions known. I felt a cold hand shove me forcefully in the back, tumbling down the wooden stairs to land in a heap, my leg twisted painfully beneath me. Laughter echoed around me, a harsh, grating sound that chilled my blood. Her appearances were never benign, always accompanied by the foul stench of rotting meat. Each visitation left behind swarms of houseflies, clustering around the spots she had manifested as if feeding off the decay she brought with her. One night, in a voice that rasped like dry leaves skittering across a cold floor, she spoke directly to me, her figure a blurry outline in the moonlit hallway. Burn me, and be free," she hissed, her voice a serpent's whisper. Desperation clawed at my mind, a frantic, clawing creature that pushed me towards the unthinkable. I found her grave, desolate and forgotten, in the corner of the old town cemetery. The deed was done under the cover of darkness, her bones crackling in the fire like the breaking of an unholy seal. I thought it would end the nightmare. I was wrong. My actions only intensified her hauntings. The spectral assaults grew more violent, more personal. Objects flew with lethal intent. Her spectral form loomed over me at night, fingers clawing at the air, her eyes burning coals of pure hatred. The house became a prison of paranormal fury, each corner whispering with malevolence, each shadow alive with her rage. Driven to the brink, I was soon caught and charged. My defense, the truth of Mrs. Whitaker's hauntings, was met with derisive laughter and shaking heads. The courtroom thought me mad, but the prison offered no respite either, though she never appeared within its cold walls. After my release, burdened by fines and a tattered reputation, I returned to the only place I had left, the house. The hauntings resumed with renewed vigor, as if she had been conserving her energy, waiting for me. The night stretched long with her torments, her presence an unending terror. The flies, the rot, her rage, everything melded into a ceaseless cacophony of horror that eventually snapped whatever threads of sanity I had clung to. Now I reside in the sterile, white confines of a psychiatric ward, but not even these walls can shield me from her. At night, she visits, a reminder of the outside world's ignorance of the true horrors that lurk in the unseen. Her laughter fills my ears, a sound more terrifying than any scream, and I know she will never leave me. The Oil Man. I was 8 when I first came to the St. Ormond's Orphanage, a towering, grim structure whose walls seemed to whisper with the echoes of its dismal past. I learned of the Oil Man on my very first night, as the older kids huddled us together, their voices low, their eyes darting nervously to the dark corners of our dormitory. "He walks the halls at night," they said, a hint of fear in their whispers. "Covered in black, like he's been dipped in oil, all slick and shiny. That's why they call him the Oil Man." But it wasn't just his appearance that terrorized us. It was what he did. He never touched a child, but what he did to our minds, our sanity, was far worse. Dolls would dance on their own in the dead of night, their eyes glowing red as if possessed. Shadows would morph into monstrous spiders dangling above our beds, their legs twitching as if ready to descend upon us. The halls would often fill with the stench of rotten meat, so overpowering that it clung to our clothes, our hair, even our dreams. I remember the night the orphanage burned. Flames engulfed the old structure with furious speed, as if the building itself was eager to be rid of its spectral occupant. They said it was an accident, faulty wiring, or something equally mundane. But we knew it was the Oil Man, his rage uncontained, setting his prison ablaze. The orphanage was relocated, but the shell of the old building remained, condemned and forsaken, a charred monument to horrors past. Life moved on, I grew up, and the nightmares faded into the background noise of adult life, until a few nights ago. I found myself walking by the old St. Ormond's site at dusk, the sky a deep, bleeding crimson as the sun dipped below the horizon. A chill coursed through me, not from the cold, but from a haunting familiarity. The smell hit me first, the unmistakable stench of decay so potent it twisted my stomach. Glancing up, my heart froze. In the shattered window of the second floor, a silhouette loomed, its outline slick and shiny against the fading light. The Oil Man. His presence was as commanding as ever, his form undulating slightly, as if made of the viscous, dark substance from which he took his name. Our eyes locked, and a flood of memories rushed back. The fear, the sleepless nights, the whispers in the dark. Hurrying home, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a trick of memory and fear. But when I reached my apartment, that familiar, rancid odor awaited me. It was faint, but unmistakably there, the smell of rotten meat. Panic set in as I realized the implications. The Oil Man had never left the confines of the orphanage grounds before. Yet, here was this stench, this undeniable sign of his presence in my own home. Sleep became a distant memory as I lay awake, listening to the subtle shifts and creaks of the building, half expecting to see dolls begin to move or shadows twist into grotesque figures. As days passed, the smell would sometimes fade, giving me brief moments of hopeful respite, only to return with vigor, reminding me of its source's tenacity. The dread of him following me, leaving his cursed grounds to haunt my steps, was a terror I had never known as a child. Now, as I share my story, the boundary between past and present blurs, each creak of my apartment a sinister symphony, each shadow a potential harbinger. The oil man, a specter of my childhood, has marked me once more, his presence a malignant echo that refuses to be silenced. The orphanage may lie in ruins, but its darkest resident walks with me, his malice undiminished by time or fire. Marvin the Mosquito. In the quaint, out-of-time town of Elderview, life flowed as slowly as the languid river that traced its edge. The townsfolk, wrapped in their daily routines and traditions, seldom noticed how the world beyond progressed. To them, I was just a fixture, as much a part of the landscape as the old water tower that cast long shadows in the setting sun. They called me Marvin the Mosquito. An odd name, perhaps, but fitting for a man of my peculiarities. My figure was gaunt, my movements gangly. With every step I took, my limbs unfolded with the jerky grace of a puppet. I wore my gas mask daily, a necessary shield against the world, while layers of clothing draped over my skeletal frame. Each morning, as the dawn painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, I would shuffle into town. My destination was always the same, the small market where I purchased a jar of honey. The golden sweetness was my solace, my one indulgence in a life of solitude. The children of the town often watched me with wide eyes, their whispers floating like leaves in the wind. My presence was an enigma, a shadow on their bright days. They couldn't understand what it meant to be me, to live as a pariah on the fringes of their laughter-filled world. One fateful day, the fabric of my quiet existence tore apart. As I approached the market, a young boy fell, his knees scraping against the rough concrete. The sight of his blood, glistening like rubies in the sunlight, awakened something primal within me. Before reason could seize control, I had scooped the boy up, his small body light in my arms, and hurried back to the safety of my shack. The screams of the townsfolk pierced the air, a cacophony of horror and confusion that chased us to the threshold of my home. But fate, it seems, had other plans. Fire engulfed my humble abode, flames licking the sky with hungry tongues. Panicked, I fled with the boy, the heat at our backs and the angry voices of the town growing fainter. The honey, my precious jars of golden calm, shattered in my haste, leaving a sticky trail that glistened under the moon's watchful eye. By the time the townsfolk found the end of the trail, by the old train tracks, it was too late. The boy lay there, his body void of the fluids that once gave him life, now rigid and cold as marble. In that moment, I was transformed in their eyes from a harmless eccentric to a monster of nightmares. I watched from the shadows as they discovered him, my heart a tangled knot of grief and terror. They never saw me again in Elderview. I vanished into the night, a specter fleeing from the light. The Watcher of Apartment 11B. In the old, musty apartment complex of Hawthorne Heights, Apartment 12B had a haunting reputation. The tenants always seemed to move out faster than they moved in, their faces paler, eyes darker, weighed down by sleepless nights. But Elisa didn't believe in ghosts. When she signed the lease, her only concern was the affordability. It was perfect, too perfect, she thought, for such a low price. The first few nights were silent, except for the occasional creaks and groans of the old building. Elisa attributed these sounds to the settling of time-worn wood and the whispers of the wind through the leaky windows. However, as days turned into weeks, a palpable sense of unease began to take root within her. It started with the mirror. Elisa noticed it first when brushing her teeth, the fleeting glimpse of a shadowy figure standing behind her in the reflection. She spun around, heart thundering, only to find nothing there but the flickering light of her old bathroom bulb. She tried to laugh it off, blaming it on her overactive imagination fueled by the horror stories from the neighbors about the cursed apartment. But the presence didn't go away. It grew more tangible, more oppressive. Elisa would often wake in the middle of the night to the suffocating feeling of being watched. In the darkest corner of her bedroom, she could make out a figure, a man, tall and gaunt with deep, hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness, staring directly at her with an unblinking, relentless gaze. His appearance became more frequent and more vivid with each passing night. She would see him in the reflections, on the TV screen, in the windows at night, always standing motionless, always watching her. His presence was accompanied by a drop in temperature and a thick, palpable dread that filled the room, squeezing the air from her lungs. Desperate for answers, Elisa researched the history of the apartment. Her heart sank as she uncovered a chilling story. Many years ago, a man named Harold had lived in apartment 11B. Described by old newspapers as a reclusive and eerie figure, Harold was found dead in the apartment, seated in his armchair, facing the door as if waiting for someone. That night, as Elisa sat on her bed, the air grew icy. The lights flickered violently, casting erratic shadows on the walls. She sensed him before she saw him, felt his gaze. Slowly, she turned towards the armchair in the corner of her room. Harold was there, seated, his eyes fixated on her. His face was contorted in a grotesque smile, his skin pale and translucent, a mere wisp of his former self yet imbued with a malevolent force. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pulsating with a silent, sinister rhythm. The man's eyes burned with a haunting glow, paralyzing Elisa with fear. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. His finger pointed at her with an accusation that chilled her to the bone. Elisa couldn't scream, couldn't move, her body bound by an invisible force. The air thickened, and the room spun as shadows danced around the periphery of her vision, whispering secrets in a language she couldn't understand. The last thing she remembered before succumbing to the darkness was the feeling of Harold's cold, ghostly fingers brushing against her skin, claiming her, pulling her into the abyss of his eternal watch. Neighbors later reported a scream that night, sharp and terror-filled, but when they checked, apartment 11B stood silent and dark. Elisa was never seen again. The apartment was left untouched, a silent sentinel keeping the horrors within, waiting patiently for the next tenant to sign the lease. And in the dark, behind the reflections, Harold continues to watch and wait. The Clown Doll. Sophie's grandmother had always been an eccentric collector of porcelain dolls, but among the myriad of glassy-eyed figures, one had always unsettled Sophie. The clown doll. Its garish face, painted with a twisted smile and hollow, staring eyes, had haunted her since childhood. When her grandmother passed away, the will inexplicably left the clown doll specifically to Sophie, as if sealing her fate. Sophie wanted nothing to do with it, but out of respect, she placed the doll on a shelf in her room, far from her bed, trying to ignore its malevolent gaze. From the first night, the air around the doll seemed to thicken, charged with a sinister energy. The disturbances began subtly. Sophie would wake up to find books and items misplaced or thrown about her room. Her parents dismissed her complaints, believing Sophie was just acting out due to grief. But as days passed, the chaos escalated. Her cat, once calm and loving, refused to enter her room, hissing at the clown doll whenever it caught sight of it. One night, Sophie awoke to a cacophony downstairs. The living room was a scene of havoc, cushions torn, pictures askew, and her father's prized collection of vintage records shattered across the floor. The clown doll was found among the debris, its painted face seemingly more contorted, its smile wider and more grotesque. Despite her protests, Sophie was grounded, her parents attributing the blame to her alone. The real terror, however, began when the animals started to get hurt. The neighbor's dog was found whimpering with a twisted paw, and wild birds were discovered dead in the backyard, their necks broken. Every morning, after each dreadful incident, the clown doll would reappear at the foot of Sophie's bed, its eyes fixated on her, as if it had never moved. Sophie's sleep became plagued with nightmares of the doll chasing her through an endless dark circus, laughing with a high, eerie giggle as it danced just out of reach. Every morning she'd wake up breathless, the clown doll's painted eyes boring into her soul. Desperate and terrified, Sophie decided to get rid of the doll. She threw it into the river that curled behind their house, watching the water swallow its grinning face. That night she slept peacefully, believing the nightmare was over. But peace was short-lived. At midnight, Sophie's room grew cold, and a familiar giggle filled the space. Her heart pounding, she darted her eyes around the dark room. There, at the foot of her bed, soaked and dripping with river water, stood the clown doll. Its smile was even more wicked now, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. From that night on, the doll no longer hid its movements. Each evening, it would begin its slow, jerky walk from the shelf as soon as the lights went out, its tiny porcelain feet tapping a haunting rhythm on the wooden floor. It tormented Sophie, moving closer each night, whispering threats in a voice that slithered into her ears like venom. The final ordeal came on a stormy night. Lightning illuminated the room in stark white flashes, revealing the clown doll standing unusually close to her bed. As thunder rolled, it spoke in a ghastly tone, promising an end to her misery. Terrified beyond reason, Sophie ran from her room, the clown doll's laughter echoing behind her. Her parents found her the next morning, shivering and inconsolable under the dining table. No trace of the clown doll was ever found again. It had vanished as mysteriously as it had acted. While Sophie's parents believed it to be stolen or lost, Sophie knew better. It was out there somewhere, waiting, its painted face forever etched in her nightmares, its hollow eyes always watching, always waiting for the night to dance again. The Shutter Man. In the sleepy town of Greywood, whispers circulated of a figure known only as the Shutter Man. An old, hunched figure, always seen with an old camera dangling from his neck, capturing photographs of unaware teenagers who roamed the streets after dark. Locals said his eyes were like voids, dark tunnels leading to nowhere but despair. The Shutter Man was first mentioned after a series of disturbing events shook Greywood. Teenagers began disappearing, vanishing without a trace, only their empty cars or dropped belongings left behind as silent witnesses. As the number of missing youths climbed, panicked rumors started to spread. Witnesses claimed seeing an old man, camera in hand, lurking near the scenes shortly before each disappearance. They said he would hide in the shadows of alleyways, his cameras flash a brief spark in the night. The photos were never seen, but it was believed he captured his victims' last moments of freedom. Despite numerous calls to authorities, the Shutter Man always seemed to vanish before they arrived, as if he was nothing more than a wisp of smoke carried away by the wind. Even when the police patrolled the streets, there were no signs of him, only the eerie feeling of being watched from afar. One cold autumn night, Mark and his friends, all high school seniors, dared each other to confront the mystery. They ventured out, their laughter cutting through the foggy darkness, dismissing the town's fears as nothing more than urban legends. But as the night deepened, a sense of foreboding settled over them. Mark felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, as if eyes were boring into him. Turning around, he saw a distant figure, the glint of a camera lens barely visible in the dim streetlight. Chilling realization swept over him. They were being followed. Whispering to his friends, they quickened their pace, but every turn they took, the figure was always a constant shadow behind them. The flicker of a flash would occasionally light up the darkness, followed by the old man's eerie, guttural laughter, echoing between the silent houses. In a moment of terror-fueled bravery, Mark decided to confront him. He broke away from his friends, charging towards the figure. As he got closer, the Shutter Man's features became clearer, the deep-set wrinkles, the lifeless eyes that seemed to capture and drown all light, and the sinister smile that crept across his face. Mark stopped in his tracks. The old man raised his camera, pointing it directly at him, and clicked. The flash blinded Mark momentarily. When his vision cleared, the Shutter Man was nowhere to be seen. He stumbled back to his friends, his heart pounding in his chest. They decided to head home, shaken but unharmed. However, when Mark returned, he found his house eerily silent. His parents, who should have been home, were nowhere to be found. In a frantic search, he finally found his mother's phone on the kitchen table. It was open to a recently taken photo, a picture of him charging towards the camera, with the shutter man smiling grotesquely behind him. Mark never saw his parents again. The police found no trace of the shutter man, and the photograph on the phone was the last evidence of that night's terror. The old man had become a ghost story, a chilling reminder whispered among the town's youth. To this day, when the fog descends upon Greywood and the night grows dark and still, the faint sound of a camera shutter can sometimes be heard, followed by an old, chilling laughter, forever haunting the town's shadowed streets. Frostbite. In the secluded town of Frost Hollow, winter was not only a season but a harbinger of dread. Every year, as the days shortened and a biting cold took over, an eerie tale was whispered around crackling fireplaces. It was about a creature known in hushed tones as Frostbite, an evil snowman that roamed the icy streets during the Christmas break. Frostbite was not the jolly, coal-eyed snowman that children made with delight. It was a grotesque figure, towering and misshapen, with jagged ice shards for teeth and deep, hollow sockets that glowed with a malevolent red light. Its arms were twisted branches, sharp as the winter wind, and it moved silently across the snow, leaving no footprints. The legend of Frostbite began many years ago after a blizzard swept through Frost Hollow, burying the town under a thick blanket of snow. The morning after the storm, the townspeople found a series of chilling tableaus throughout the town. Snowmen built in the night, not by playful hands, but by something far more sinister. Each snowman stood guard over a gruesome scene. Pets frozen mid-scream, wildlife displayed in macabre poses, and chillingly the mayor's son, who had gone missing, found encased in ice with a frozen expression of terror. From that winter onwards, every time the snow fell too thickly, Frostbite would appear, preying on those who dared to wander alone at night. The creature seemed to revel in the quiet horror it inflicted, blending into the festive decorations and the innocent snowmen that adorned the town, waiting for its next victim. This particular Christmas break, a group of college students returned home to Frost Hollow, scoffing at the warnings of the older residents. Driven by a mix of bravado and boredom, they challenged each other to a night out in the snow, aiming to debunk the myth of frostbite. As the group wandered through the desolate, snow-laden streets, they laughed and joked, the glow from their flashlights cutting through the thick curtain of falling snow. But as the night deepened, a dense fog rolled in, swallowing the light and sound, enveloping them in an oppressive silence. Suddenly, a ghastly figure emerged from the mist, its form grotesquely humanoid, made of snow but imbued with an evil that felt as old as winter itself. Frostbite towered over them, its eyes burning coals in the twilight, its mouth a gaping maw of icicle teeth. The creature moved swiftly with unnatural speed. One by one, the students tried to flee, their screams muffled by the thick snowfall. Each was caught, frozen hands reaching out in vain as Frostbite enveloped them in a chilling embrace, their bodies stiffening as the life was leached from them. The snow around each victim turned crimson, stained by the violence of their ends. By morning, the town of Frost Hollow awoke to a silent nightmare. The missing students were found as new additions to Frostbite's macabre collection of snowmen, their faces forever twisted in horror, eyes wide open and glistening under a sheen of ice. No tracks or clues were left behind, only the frozen, frightful figures that bore silent witness to Frostbite's cruelty. Now, each year as the first snow falls, the townspeople of Frost Hollow retreat early, doors locked and curtains drawn. They whisper of the nights when the wind howls like the screams of the lost, and they pray for the thaw, hoping the warmth will bring an end to the reign of Frostbite, the snowman who walks in the dead of winter, his heart as cold and unforgiving as the deepest frost. The Dollhouse Man. In the quaint but unassuming town of Harlow, Ohio, an ominous dwelling known as the Dollhouse stood at the edge of town, shrouded in local myths and whispered horrors. This was the home of Vincent Brown, a reclusive man with an eerie obsession that was unknown to his neighbors until one chilling evening in August 1987. It all began with a disturbing 911 call made from Vincent's residence. The operators could barely make sense of the incoherent, panicked voice on the other line. When the police arrived, Vincent was nowhere to be found. His absence was the first thread in the unraveling of a dark and twisted mystery. Inside the house, the atmosphere was stifling, charged with an unmistakable scent of decay. The den, the study, the living room, and even the guest room were filled with an array of bizarre mannequins. These figures were unsettling and lifelike, positioned in various poses as if frozen in time. The uncanny realism of these figures prompted a deeper investigation, which revealed a horrifying truth. The mannequins were crafted over real human remains. As the house yielded more secrets, the police discovered a grotesque collection of these odd puppets, stored away in multiple closets throughout the home. The second floor harbored even darker discoveries. In one storage room, mummified human remains were meticulously packed away, and yet another room on the same level held similar macabre contents. The most disturbing scene awaited in Vincent's upstairs bedroom. Here, amidst the shadows, stood a particularly ghastly doll, its features twisted in an expression of terror, as if it were a silent witness to the horrors that pervaded the house. The basement of the house presented a scene straight out of a nightmare. The air was heavy with the smell of decomposition. The ground was wet and muddy, adding to the sense of dread that filled the space. A freshly dug hole led to a crude crawl space below the house. It was here, in this claustrophobic darkness, that the police found a man. This individual bore a striking resemblance to Vincent Brown, but disturbingly, it was not him. This doppelganger, or whoever he was, seemed just as lost and confused as those who discovered him. Despite the extensive search and the chilling evidence uncovered in his home, Vincent Brown himself was never found. His whereabouts remained a mystery, as did the origins of the countless victims entombed within his macabre collection. The house, forever dubbed the Dollhouse, stands as a morbid monument to his dark legacy, its secrets as impenetrable as the shadows that fill its rooms. Each night, the windows of the old brown house flicker with an eerie light, as if Vincent himself might still be wandering its halls, forever adding to his dreadful collection. Piano key teeth. It was a dark and quiet night. The moon, shy and hidden behind thick clouds, cast an eerie shadow over the empty streets, giving them an almost otherworldly glow. A young woman named Emily was walking home from work, tired after a long day yet comforted by thoughts of a warm home and a hot cup of tea. As she walked, her footsteps echoed softly on the pavement, a solitary sound in the quiet night. That's when she noticed a figure approaching from the opposite direction. The man was unusually tall and skinny, with a long face that was both gaunt and pale, illuminated faintly by the dim streetlights. His smile was wide and disturbing, stretching unnaturally across his face. As the distance between them closed, Emily observed something peculiar about the man: his teeth. They were stark white, shiny, and unnaturally long, resembling piano keys. The sight unnerved her deeply, and instinctively, she thought about crossing the street to avoid him. But before she could decide, the man stopped abruptly, still smiling that bizarre, unsettling smile, his eyes fixed intently on her. Frozen in place, Emily, in an attempt to dispel the growing tension, managed to utter a soft hello. In response, the man did something horrifying. With a frantic burst of motion, he placed his fingertips on his teeth and began playing them like piano keys, producing a chilling, discordant melody that seemed to slice through the silent night. Terrified, Emily ran across the street to the other sidewalk, her heart pounding as she sprinted towards her apartment. She glanced back continuously, seeing the man still standing there, playing his teeth as if they were an instrument. His music followed her, echoing off the buildings, creating a nightmarish soundtrack to her flight. Eventually, Emily reached the steps of her apartment building. The frantic piano music had faded, and there was no sign of the man. Relief washed over her as she approached her door, but just as she was about to climb the steps, she heard a crooked, raspy voice from behind her. "Oh, beautiful." Heart sinking, Emily slowly turned her head, too frightened to move her body. Standing there, not 2 feet away, was the man with the piano key teeth, his eerie smile wider than before. Before she could react, he grabbed her by the arm and pulled her towards him. Emily tried to scream, but the man quickly covered her mouth with his hand. "Don't scream," he whispered chillingly. "I just want to play you a song with my piano key teeth." With unnatural strength, he pinned her to the ground and sat atop her to keep her in place. Then he opened his mouth again, revealing those elongated piano key teeth, and began to play a haunting melody. Emily's body went numb with fear. She begged him to stop, but he just kept playing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stopped and looked down at her with that same sinister smile. "Thank you for listening to my beautiful music," he said, then got up and walked away, disappearing into the night's darkness. Emily lay there, trembling with fear, unharmed physically, but emotionally shattered. The memory of that night and the man with piano key teeth haunted her for the rest of her life, a melody of terror that never ceased to play in the back of her mind. Top Hat Tommy. In the fog-veiled streets of San Francisco, where the gleam of modernity casts long shadows, a haunting figure drifts. Top Hat Tommy, as the whispers name him, is more than a ghost story told to scare the straying. He's a malevolent specter, his presence a malignant whisper in the wind. Tommy wasn't always a ghoul. Legend has it he was once a man of status, adorned in a pristine white suit, his face painted like a ghostly mime to hide the scars of a disfigured life. But something dark gnawed at Tommy's soul, twisting him into something neither alive nor dead. Now Top Hat Tommy wears his tall white top hat, a grotesque grin revealing rows upon rows of rotten, jagged teeth, a chilling contrast to his ghostly white makeup. By day, he's but a tale, a dismissed myth. But as night descends and the city's heartbeat slows, Tommy emerges from the shadows. He doesn't walk, but seems to glide over the damp cobblestones, his tall figure cutting through the mist like a blade. Those unfortunate enough to encounter him, often the city's most vulnerable, the homeless and the addicts, find themselves ensnared by his hypnotic gaze. It's said that Tommy's eyes, cold and dead, reflect your deepest fears, drawing out the darkest parts of the human soul. Under Tommy's influence, these tormented souls commit unspeakable acts. A homeless man, once harmless, finds himself driven to madness, his hands stained with the blood of a fellow outcast. An addict, desperate and lost, becomes a puppet to Tommy's vile intentions, committing robberies and violent acts against innocent bystanders. The streets become a playground for chaos and despair, all orchestrated by the sinister Tough Hat Tommy. The police dismiss the tales as urban legends, attributing the violence to drug-induced psychosis or the desperate acts of the destitute. But those who've seen the eerie silhouette of Tough Hat Tommy, his white suit barely visible in the moonlit fog, know better. One such witness, an old woman known only as Miss Clara, recounts her chilling encounter. His face was a ghastly white, like death itself had brushed its fingers across his skin, she whispers, her voice trembling. And his smile, those teeth, they weren't human. He whispered things, terrible things, and though I wanted to run, my feet were rooted to the spot, as if the very ground conspired to keep me there. As the tale of Tough Hat Tommy grows, so does the terror. No longer confined to the darkest corners of the city, his influence seeps into the veins of San Francisco. The streets, once bustling with life, now whisper with fear at night. People hurry home, avoiding the shadows where Tough Hat Tommy might lurk. And somewhere in the night, a figure in a white suit smiles a rotten smile, his top hat casting a long shadow over the broken and the lost. For Top Hat Tommy is no mere poltergeist. He is a demon, reveling in the chaos of a city that never truly sleeps, feeding on the despair he so deftly cultivates. So heed this tale, a warning whispered on the wind. Beware the night in San Francisco, for Tough Hat Tommy waits, and his game has just begun. The Basement People. In the shadowy heart of the city, the old Eldridge Avenue apartment complex rose like a relic from another era, its facade marred by years of neglect. Rumors swirled among the local youth about a hidden floor, a secret basement level that didn't appear on any official blueprint. It was said to be inhabited by the basement people, a horde of grotesque humanoids wrapped in hazmat suits, their faces obscured by ghastly, otherworldly gas masks. The basement people, according to whispered legends, were neither dead nor alive. They paced frantically and erratically through the dimly lit corridors and rooms of their subterranean lair, forever searching for something they could never find. Their movements were feverish, their presence an omen of dread. One chilly autumn evening, driven by a mix of bravado and curiosity, two teenagers, Mike and Eliza, decided to uncover the truth. The duo entered the building under the guise of darkness, their hearts pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. As they explored the first floor, Mike stumbled upon a concealed staircase behind a movable panel in the wall. With a shared glance, they descended into the unknown, flashlights in hand, the air growing colder as they went. The staircase terminated abruptly on a floor that was not supposed to exist. The air was stale, and the minimal lighting flickered ominously. They barely had a moment to orient themselves when the first of the basement people appeared. The figure was tall, its movements erratic, and its flashlight cutting through the darkness like a blade. The scream that erupted from the masked figure was chilling, more animal than human, echoing off the concrete walls. More flashlights turned their way, converging on them as more screams filled the air. The chase was on. Mike and Eliza ran through the labyrinthine basement, the sound of their pursuers' heavy, irregular footsteps a constant reminder of the danger on their heels. They darted into rooms cluttered with strange machinery and through narrow corridors lined with pipes, the screams and the sound of the hazmat fabric rustling haunting them relentlessly. Eventually, they found a small alcove and squeezed into it, holding their breaths as the basement people scoured the area. The beams of their flashlights swept past the alcove's entrance repeatedly, each pass a threat of imminent discovery. After what seemed like an eternity, the footsteps and lights receded. Mike and Eliza, their bodies tense with adrenaline, waited for their chance to escape. When they finally crept out of their hiding spot, the basement was ominously silent. They made their way back to the staircase, but just as they were about to ascend, a multitude of hands reached out from the shadows, grabbing them with inhuman strength. Their screams echoed down the staircase as they were dragged back into the depths of the basement. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to Mike and Eliza after they were caught by the basement people. The staircase they found was sealed off, the panel expertly hidden once more. In the basement of the Eldridge Avenue apartment complex, where light barely touches and the air is forever cold, the basement people continue their eternal frantic search. Occasionally, tenants above complain of strange noises at night, of screams that sound almost human, and the eerie echo of something prowling just beneath their feet. As for Mike and Eliza, their final resting places are said to be within that hidden basement, their bodies now hollowed out and displayed grotesquely, a grim feast long consumed. Some say, during the quietest of nights, you can still hear their faint whispers, forever entwined with the restless pacing of the basement people, who may indeed be more insect than man. Mr. Skin. In the rural town of Grafton, nestled on the edge of old forestry land, the locals whispered tales of a figure known only as Mr. Skin. According to legend, he was once a man named Harold Ginn, a reclusive fur trapper who lived deep in the woods. After a mysterious fire burned his cabin to the ground, Harold vanished. Some said he moved on. Others believed something far more sinister unfolded in those dense, shadow-cloaked trees. Years later, stories began to surface about a strange figure haunting the edge of the woods. He was described as grotesque, with multiple layers of human skin draped over his body like ill-fitting clothes, each piece crudely stitched to the next. They said his eyes, barely visible beneath the overlapping folds, glinted with a madness forged from isolation and despair. One chilling autumn night, a group of teenagers dared each other to venture into Harold's old territory to debunk the myths. They laughed and jeered as they plunged into the thickening fog, but their laughter soon died on their lips. Deep in the woods, they stumbled upon a dilapidated shack, its walls plastered with drying human skins, stretched and tanned like macabre leather. The air was thick with the coppery tang of blood and decay. As they turned to flee, they came face to face with Mr. Skin. His voice when he spoke was a gurgling rasp. So many layers, yet so cold, would you spare a layer to warm old bones? Paralyzed by fear, the teenagers could only watch in horror as he shuffled forward, the extra skins on his body whispering with his movements. One of the braver souls, a boy named Tommy, stepped back and brandished a pocket knife. "Stay back," he stammered, his voice trembling. But Mr. Skin only laughed, a sound that seemed to come from multiple throats at once. In a blur of movement, too quick for something of his grotesque bulk, he lunged. Tommy screamed as cold, clammy hands wrapped around his arm, pulling him into the dark embrace of layered skin. The others fled in terror, crashing through the underbrush and back to the safety of their homes. They told their tale, breathless and weeping, to disbelieving parents. A search party was formed at dawn, but all they found were Tommy's torn clothes and his pocket knife, sticky with blood, near the entrance to the shack. After that night, the town was gripped by a paralyzing fear. No one ventured near the woods after dark, and slowly the town began to decline as people moved away, unwilling to live in the shadow of such a nightmare. Mr. Skin became a legend, a ghost story told in hushed tones. Yet, every year as the chill of October creeps through Grafton, a fresh skin appears pinned to the old oak tree at the forest's edge, a chilling reminder that some legends are draped in layers of horrifying truth. The twins. In the sleepy town of Elmsfield, nestled between overgrown fields and shadowy woods, there stood the old brick building of Hawthorne Elementary. Locals whispered that the school was cursed, haunted by twin ghosts, a boy and a girl named Ian and Ida, whose presence turned its hallways into places of quiet terror. Ian and Ida had been students at Hawthorne long ago, inseparable in life, twins with a deep but unsettling bond. Their attachment to each other was strong, yet their isolation from other children was profound. They spoke rarely, and when they did, it was often in a strange, cryptic language that no one else could understand. The local legend said that one cold winter's day, the twins vanished during recess. They were playing near the old oak tree by the schoolyard, a place rumored to be cursed, and simply never returned. Despite a lengthy search, they were never found, and over time, they became nothing more than a footnote in the school's storied history. As years turned into decades, strange occurrences began to manifest within the school's walls. It started subtly, whispers in empty rooms, fleeting shadows in the corners of the hallways, and the sound of laughter echoing where no child was present. However, the disturbances grew increasingly violent and bizarre. Books would fly off shelves, doors would slam shut with ferocious strength, and chilling drafts swept through closed windows. Teachers reported seeing the ghostly figures of Ian and Ida hand in hand with sinister smiles and hollow eyes that flickered with malice. The twins seemed to revel in chaos and fear. Their favorite haunt was the old oak tree, where they were often seen at dusk. The playground around the tree would come alive with eerie laughter as swings moved on their own and the seesaw creaked under invisible weight. Children who dared play there after sunset spoke of feeling cold hands push them from swings or pull their hair. One chilling account involved a young boy who claimed Ian and Ida had whispered a deadly game to him, one that would make him disappear like them if he lost. As the haunting escalated, the community was gripped with fear. Parents started pulling their children from Hawthorne, and teachers resigned, unwilling to step foot in a place governed by such malevolence. The school's reputation deteriorated until it was forced to shut down, the building left to decay, its windows boarded up, a silent sentinel in the encroaching darkness of the woods. Yet the story of Ian and Ida was far from over. On foggy nights, when the wind howls through the trees and the world seems blurred and unsettled, the ghosts of the twins can still be seen at the playground, their voices carried by the wind. They whisper to anyone who listens, enticing them to join in their ghostly games to become a part of their eternal, spectral existence. And so Hawthorne Elementary stands empty, a monument to the unknown and a playground for the dead. The locals avoid the place, leaving it to the whispers of the past and the laughter of Ian and Ida, echoing across the schoolyard, a chilling reminder of the thin veil between life and the dark beyond. Giggles the Clown. In the forgotten heart of the city lay the remnants of Harrogate Carnival, a once vibrant sight now shrouded in decay and dark rumors. At the center of the carnival, surrounded by rusting rides and overgrown paths, stood a derelict carousel, its faded horses frozen in mid-gallop, forever chasing a finish line they would never reach. But it was what lurked beneath this carousel that kept the locals whispering in terrified tones. The clown, once the joyous heart of Harrogate, had transformed into something grotesque after the carnival's closure. His name was Giggles, a character that once made children laugh and parents smile. But as the carnival's lights dimmed for the last time, Giggles did not leave. He descended into the catacombs beneath the carousel, into a world of darkness and madness. As years passed, urban explorers and thrill-seekers ventured into the carnival, drawn by the allure of its ghostly presence. Few returned from these expeditions, and those who did whispered of a sinister laughter echoing through the empty air, and a figure clad in a tattered, blood-stained clown suit that watched from the shadows. The truth was far more horrifying. Giggles had become a cannibal, driven insane by solitude and the echoing joy of past laughter which now tormented him as cruel taunts. He adorned his subterranean lair with the remains of his victims, bones crafted into macabre decorations, flesh dried and hung like ghastly streamers. His face, once painted with vibrant colors, now bore a grotesque mask of blood and grime, his eyes gleaming with a frenzied, unholy light. The legend of Giggles grew when a group of teenagers disappeared one night after they decided to film a daredevil video in the carnival. The footage, found weeks later on an abandoned camera, revealed their final, terror-filled moments. The camera jittered wildly, capturing brief flashes of the carousel's cracked paint, and then suddenly, the twisted visage of Giggles as he emerged from below. His laughter was guttural, a sound not of this earth as he lunged toward them, his gnarled hands outstretched and his teeth bared, sharp and eager. The police investigation turned up little but the remnants of belongings and a trail leading to the carousel. Beneath it, they found the clown's den of horrors, an abyss lined with human remains and the air thick with the stench of death. They say when the officers emerged, they were no longer the same, their eyes hollow, their nights haunted by the echoing laughter of a mad clown. No one goes near Harrogate Carnival now. The city has considered demolishing it several times, but somehow it never happens. Some believe the malevolent spirit of Giggles guards it, keeping the machine standing as a monument to his insanity. At night, if you listen closely, you can still hear the faint strains of carousel music, warped and slow, playing to an audience of ghosts, and the low, rumbling laughter of Giggles, waiting for the next curious soul to wander into his macabre domain. They say once you hear the laughter, it's already too late. The clown has claimed another, and somewhere beneath the creaking carousel, Giggles prepares for his ghastly feast. Thank you for watching TobattoVision's Creepypasta compilation, 1 hour of original scary stories written by Brandon Tobatto. Be sure to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know in the comments below if you would like to see another one of these Creepypasta compilation videos down the road. Again, thank you for watching, and as always, stay spooky, treat every day like Halloween, and always add melted butter to your box of Milk Duds. Good night.